For 15 years, I never told my son-in-law that I was a former FBI agent. To him, I was just an old woodworker who was too slow, too quiet, and too easy to control. But after my daughter died, he came to my house, broke the lock, and demanded I hand over the home she left behind. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply waited. And when he walked through my door that night, the man who thought he was hunting an old woodworker discovered the truth I had hidden for 15 years. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, I want to know where you are watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It means the world to me to see how far Revenge Dad reaches. A note before we continue: this story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and meaningful storytelling. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything it means to say it means sincerely. The clock on the microwave read 1:47 in the morning when I heard it. Not the usual sounds a house makes at night, not the settling of old wood or the hum of the refrigerator. This was something else entirely. A thin, deliberate scrape of metal pressing against the deadbolt on my kitchen door. Then a soft, muffled crack like safety glass giving way under steady pressure. I was already awake. I had been awake for hours. I sat in the far corner of my living room in the dark in the old leather armchair Emily had given me 3 Christmases ago. Every light in the house was off. The only glow came from the street lamp outside, pushing a thin orange line through the gap in the curtains and laying it across the hardwood floor like a ruler. My name is Walter Hayes. I am 65 years old. Most people in Pasadena who know me would describe me as a quiet man who keeps to himself, drinks his coffee black, and runs a small woodworking shop out of his garage. They would tell you I make tables and chairs and storage boxes that I smell like sawdust most days, and that I wave hello from my front porch every morning like a man who has made peace with the slower rhythms of life. They would not be wrong, but they would not have the full picture either. For 20 years, before the sawdust and the coffee and the quiet mornings, I was a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, white-collar crime division. I spent 2 decades hunting people who believed they were smarter than everyone else in the room, people who forged signatures, laundered money, and buried the evidence so deep they thought no one would ever find it. I was very good at my job. And then, 15 years ago, I walked away from it. I locked my badge in a drawer, moved to Pasadena, built my shop, and decided that the only cases I wanted to solve from that point forward involved figuring out the right wood grain for a dining room table. I kept my past hidden from almost everyone. My neighbors did not know. The people at my church did not know. And my son-in-law, Ryan Carter, the man who was about to break into my home, absolutely did not know. He thought he was coming to frighten an old man. He had no idea what he was walking into. I heard the kitchen door push open. The hinges gave a small protest, a sound I knew well because I had been meaning to oil them for 2 months and never got around to it. Then came the low beam of a flashlight sweeping across the kitchen tiles and the sound of 2 men moving carefully the way men move when they believe the person they are hunting is asleep upstairs. My heart rate did not spike. It did not race or stutter. Instead, it did something that always surprised people when I described it. It dropped. It settled into that slow, cold, measured rhythm I had not felt in 15 years. My hands rested loose on the arms of the chair. My breathing came even and quiet. Every nerve in my body shifted from rest into something else entirely, something sharp and still and completely focused. This feeling used to have a name at the Bureau. We called it going operational. I had not gone operational since the day I retired. But the body does not forget. And in that moment, sitting in Emily's chair in the dark of my living room, I was grateful for that. I need to tell you how I got to this chair. I need to tell you about Emily and about Ryan, and about the 9 days between the worst morning of my life and this one, because none of what happened at 1:47 in the morning makes sense without understanding what came before it. 3 weeks ago, my daughter was alive. Emily Hayes Carter, 34 years old, 3rd grade teacher at Rosemead Elementary School, the kind of woman who kept a jar of spare change on her kitchen counter, specifically for the kids in her class who forgot their lunch money. She had my mother's laugh and her own stubborn sense of right and wrong, and she was the single best thing I had ever had anything to do with in 65 years of living. She was gone now, a cardiac event the doctors called it, sudden, severe. There had been no warning anyone could have pointed to, clearly no moment where we might have seen it coming and done something differently. One morning, she was here, and by that evening she was not, and the silence she left behind in my house was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. I was still learning how to breathe inside that silence when Ryan showed up at my front door 4 days after the funeral. No flowers, no casserole, no red eyes from crying. He had a leather folder tucked under one arm and the look of a man arriving for a scheduled appointment. He wanted the house. He sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me with a calm that made my jaw tighten that as Emily's husband, he had a rightful claim to her assets, and that this property should be transferred to his name without delay. He slid paperwork across the table, transfer of title documents, notarized, prepared. I pushed them back. This house has been in my name since before Emily ever married you, I told him. It is my property. There is nothing here to transfer. Ryan's jaw shifted. His eyes went flat in a way I recognized immediately the way eyes go flat when a person has already decided that conversation is a formality and the real plan comes later. You have 48 hours to reconsider, he said. He picked up his folder, straightened his jacket, and walked out my front door. That was 9 days ago. In the 9 days between that conversation and this moment, I had learned things about Ryan Carter that had turned my grief into something colder and more focused. I had made phone calls. I had reviewed documents. I had sat across a coffee shop table from an old colleague named Marcus Webb, a detective with the LAPD who had worked cases alongside me years ago, and I had laid out everything I had found. And then I had come home, turned off every light in the house, and sat down in Emily's chair to wait. The flashlight beam swung out of the kitchen and into the hallway. I heard Ryan's voice low and tight. The study is at the end of the hall. The paperwork has to be in there. We find it, we get what we need, and we are gone in 10 minutes. I pressed my back into the chair and let the darkness hold me where I sat. 10 minutes, I thought. He was not going to need 10 minutes. In the darkness of my living room, with 2 men moving through my kitchen and the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing down on my chest, my mind went to Emily. It always went to Emily. She had a habit of showing up at my workshop without calling ahead. Just the sound of the side gate swinging open, then her footsteps on the gravel path, and then her voice cutting through the whine of my table saw. Dad, you are going to lose a finger one day, and then who is going to feel sorry for you? Dad. She had called me that since she was old enough to talk. That word had traveled through her childhood and planted itself permanently in her vocabulary, outlasting everything else. To everyone else, I was Walter. To Emily, I was always Dad. I have had all my fingers for 62 years. I told her once, switching off the saw and pulling off my safety glasses. I think they know to stay where they belong. She laughed at that. She laughed the way her mother used to laugh, with her whole body, her shoulders shaking, and her hand coming up to cover her mouth, like she was trying to contain something too big to hold in. I loved that laugh more than I could ever say out loud. Emily taught 3rd grade at Rosemead Elementary, about 4 miles from my house. She had wanted to be a teacher since she was 7 years old, and she had never once wavered from that. Her classroom had a reading corner with a beanbag chair and a shelf of paperbacks. She bought herself every August before school started, and she knew every one of her students' names before the first day of class. She had been married to Ryan Carter for 5 years. I want to be honest about the fact that I never trusted him. Not from the first time Emily brought him home for Sunday dinner, not through the engagement, not through the wedding, not through any of the years that followed. There was something in the way Ryan moved through a room that put my old instincts on edge. Not anything I could name cleanly, just a quality of attention that was slightly off. He looked at things before he looked at people. His eyes would travel across the furniture, the bookshelves, the framed photographs on the walls, and then settle on you with a smile that came just a half-second too late. I noticed, but I said nothing. Emily was happy, or she seemed happy. And I had spent enough years inside other people's worst moments to know that a father's suspicion offered without evidence rarely does anything except damage the relationship it is trying to protect. So I watched. That was the one habit from my bureau years I could never fully switch off. I watched Ryan at holiday dinners and summer barbecues. I watched how he spoke to Emily when he thought no one was paying attention, the way his voice dropped into something flatter and cooler whenever she said something he did not like. I watched how he changed the subject whenever money came up, steering the conversation sideways with a smoothness that most people probably read as tact. I did not read it as tact. 6 months before Emily got sick, the numbers stopped adding up. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about that. Emily had asked me to hold on to some joint account statements after their home printer broke down, and when I sat down to file them away, the withdrawals caught my attention, the way a crooked picture frame catches your eye. You are not looking for it. You just cannot look away from it once you have seen it. Transfers to accounts I did not recognize. Amounts that were large enough to matter, but not so large as to trigger automatic flags. A pattern that, to someone who had spent 20 years studying financial fraud at the federal level, was as readable as a neon sign. My chest tightened the way it used to before a difficult interview. My hands went very still on the paper in front of me. I picked up my phone to call Emily. I put it back down. I picked it up again and held it without dialing. She had mentioned feeling tired that week, more tired than usual. She had a doctor's appointment coming up, and she had brushed it off as nothing, just the end of a long school year catching up with her. I told myself I would wait until after the appointment. I told myself there was no point in loading more weight onto her shoulders before I knew what I was actually dealing with. The appointment led to more appointments. The tiredness had a name, and then the name had a follow-up. And then I was driving Emily to Huntington Hospital twice a week, and making sure her refrigerator was stocked, and watching her grade papers on my couch in the evenings, because she did not want to be alone in that house. I kept the account statements in a folder in my filing cabinet. I told myself I would bring it up when she was stronger. She never got stronger. Denise Holt, my neighbor of 11 years, was the one who sat with me the night Emily died. Denise was a retired nurse, a solid and practical woman who showed love through action rather than words. She appeared at my front door within 20 minutes of my phone call, and she stayed until 4 in the morning, making tea I did not drink, and sitting close enough on the couch that I could feel the warmth of another person beside me without having to ask for it. "You don't have to talk," she said, pressing the mug into my hands anyway. "I know," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected, scraped hollow. "I just don't know what to do with my hands." Denise reached over and put her hand over me, and both of us holding the warm mug between us. "Then we just sit here and hold the cup," she said. "That's enough for right now." It was the kindest thing anyone said to me in those first hours. Not because of the words, but because she understood that grief in its earliest stage is mostly a problem of the body. You do not know where to put yourself. You do not know how to occupy the space that used to be filled by someone else. 4 days later, Ryan came. No phone call, no warning, just the sound of a car pulling into my driveway at 9 in the morning, and then a knock at my door that was 2 beats too sharp and too confident for a man who had just buried his wife. He was wearing a jacket and tie. He was carrying a leather folder, and when I opened the door, his eyes went directly past me and into the house, moving across the entryway, the way an assessor's eyes move across a property, calculating and cold. My jaw tightened. The hairs on the back of my neck rose the way they used to in interview rooms when I knew the person across the table was about to lie to me. "Ryan," I said. I did not step back to let him in. He looked at me then. He smiled, and the smile did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "Walter," he said, "we need to talk about the house." I stepped back from the door, not because I was inviting him in, but because I needed to see his face clearly in the morning light, and the angle was wrong from where I was standing. Ryan took that half step back as permission and walked into my entryway. He moved the way he always moved in my house, like he was already measuring the place. His eyes touched the crown, molding the oak staircase, the original hardwood floors I had refinished myself 12 years ago. Then they came back to me, and he set the leather folder down on the entry table without being asked. "Emily's estate needs to be settled," he said. "The sooner the better, for both of us." My hands were loose at my sides. I kept them that way deliberately. "Emily's estate," I repeated. "Ryan, this house has been in my name since 2004. Emily lived here with you, but she never held the title. There is nothing in her estate to settle as far as this property is concerned." Something moved behind Ryan's eyes. A tightening. A recalculation. "I had documents prepared," he said. He opened the folder and slid 2 pages across the entry table toward me. "Transfer of title. It just needs your signature." I looked at the pages without picking them up. I could see the notary stamp from where I stood. The formatted paragraphs, the signature line at the bottom with my name printed beneath it in clean block letters. My stomach dropped about 2 inches. Not from fear, from recognition. I had seen documents like these before, hundreds of times. I knew exactly what they were designed to do. And I knew exactly what kind of person prepares them in advance and brings them to a grieving man's door 4 days after a funeral. "I am not signing anything," I said. My voice came out level and quiet the way it used to in interview rooms when I needed a subject to understand that what I was saying was not a starting position. It was the ending position. "You need to leave now, Ryan." His jaw tightened. The pleasant expression he had arrived with dropped away completely, and what replaced it was something harder and a great deal less careful. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said. His voice had gone flat. "I am giving you the opportunity to handle this cleanly. You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, I will pursue every legal avenue available to me, and I promise you, Walter, it will cost you a great deal more than just signing a piece of paper today." He picked up his folder. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out my front door without looking back, and I stood in my entryway and listened to his car back out of my driveway and disappear down the street. Then I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and found the business card I was looking for. The notary's name was printed on it in small professional type, Gerald Marsh. I had known Gerald since my bureau days. He was a careful man, meticulous about his records, and he answered on the second ring. "Gerald," I said, "I have a document in front of me with your stamp on it. Transfer of title residential property. I need to know when it was prepared." There was a pause on the other end of the line, papers shuffling. "Walter," Gerald said slowly, "that one came through my office on October 14th. I pressed my free hand flat against the surface of my desk. October 14th. 3 weeks before Emily died. 3 weeks before Ryan stood at a graveside with a funeral program in his hand and accepted condolences from people who believed he was a man destroyed by loss. He had been preparing these documents while Emily was still alive, while she was still coming to my house on Sunday afternoons and sitting in my workshop and laughing at my jokes about keeping all my fingers. My chest did not tighten this time. It went cold, completely thoroughly cold. The kind of cold I had not felt since the last time I sat across a table from someone whose wrongdoing had stopped being about money and started being about something much worse. "Thank you, Gerald," I said. "I may need you to confirm that in writing." "Of course," he said. "Walter, is everything all right?" I looked at the transfer document still sitting on my entry table. I looked at the drawer where my old badge had been sitting untouched for 15 years. "Not yet," I said, "but it will be." I did not sleep that night. I sat at my desk with the transfer documents Ryan had left behind, a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I did what I had done at the start of every serious case in my bureau years. I wrote down everything I knew, everything I had observed, every number that had not added up, every expression that had arrived a half-second too late, every question Ryan had deflected with a smile instead of an answer. By 2 in the morning, I had filled 4 pages. By 3, I had made my first phone call. Marcus Webb picked up on the third ring, which told me he had been awake too. "Walter." His voice was rough, but alert. Marcus had been a detective with the LAPD for 20 years, and in that time our paths had crossed on 3 separate federal cases. He was the kind of man who kept his word and asked precise questions, which were the 2 qualities I valued most in anyone I worked alongside. "What time is it?" 3 in the morning, I said. "I need your help." A pause, then, "Tell me." I told him everything, the documents, Gerald Marsh's confirmation, the account statements I had noticed 6 months ago and said nothing about, Ryan's 48-hour deadline, the way his eyes had moved through my house that morning, like he was already calculating square footage. When I finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say, the quiet of someone organizing what they had just heard into the right compartments. "You have observations and a timing coincidence," he said finally. "That is not nothing, but it is not enough to move on yet. What do the bank records actually show?" "That is what I am about to find out," I said. I spent the following morning at my kitchen table with my laptop and 12 months of joint account statements that Emily had shared access to with me 2 years earlier for household bill purposes. I went through every line, every entry. I cross-referenced transfer destinations against public business registries, something I still knew how to do faster than most people half my age. What I found made my coffee go cold beside me untouched. $180,000. Gone in 18 months. Not in large obvious movements that would have triggered a bank's automatic monitoring. Ryan had been too careful for that. Instead, it had gone in careful increments, 8,000 here, 12,000 there. Transferred to 3 different accounts registered to limited liability companies in Nevada, shell structures, The kind of thing that looks like ordinary business activity to an untrained eye and looks like a deliberate concealment pattern to someone who spent 20 years taking them apart. My jaw ached. I realized I had been clenching my teeth for the better part of an hour. I called Marcus again. 180,000, I said when he answered. Transferred to Nevada LLCs over 18 months. The pattern is textbook clearing. He was moving Emily's money and making it look like business expenses. Marcus exhaled slowly. Okay, that is more than a coincidence. But Walter Bank records showing transfers to LLCs are still going to need a forensic accountant to untangle before any DA is going to look at them seriously. And the forgery on those title documents needs a handwriting expert and a paper trail. That takes weeks. I know, I said. What we need, Marcus said, is for Ryan to do something we can document in real time. Something that puts him at the scene of an actual crime with evidence that does not require a 3-week analysis to explain to a jury. I understood exactly what he was saying. I had said the same thing myself, more times than I could count, standing in rooms with federal prosecutors who needed a clean, simple story instead of a complicated one. He will come back, I said. He has to. The will reading is next week and he does not know what is in it. He is running out of time and desperate men make moves. If he comes back, Marcus said carefully, you call me before anything else. You do not engage alone. Agreed. Agreed, I said. I hung up and sat for a moment with my hands flat on the table. Then I opened Emily's contact list on the shared family phone account and scrolled until I found a name I did not recognize. Sandra Cole, attorney at law, Pasadena. Emily had added this number 8 months ago. She had never mentioned a personal attorney to me. She had never mentioned needing one. My throat tightened until it hurt. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it. Emily had been doing things quietly, things she had not told me about. And for the first time since Ryan had walked out my front door, the grief sitting in my chest shifted slightly, making room for something else. Not anger, not yet. Something more like awe. I picked up my phone and dialed Sandra Cole's office. Her assistant answered and told me the first available appointment was tomorrow morning at 9. I will be there, I said. I set the phone down. Outside my workshop window, the late afternoon light was turning the sawdust on my workbench the color of warm honey. I looked at it for a long moment, and then I looked at the bottom drawer of my desk where the badge was sitting. I did not open it, not yet, but I left it unlocked for the first time in 15 years. Sandra Cole's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Colorado Boulevard, 3 blocks east of Old Town Pasadena. I arrived 8 minutes early and sat in the waiting area with my coat folded across my lap, watching the morning light come through the tall windows and lay itself across the hardwood floor in long, pale rectangles. The receptionist offered me coffee. I said yes without thinking about it and then did not touch the cup. Sandra Cole came out to meet me herself rather than sending her assistant. She was 45, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of posture that told you she had spent years in rooms where she needed people to take her seriously. She shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I am glad you called. I was going to reach out to you myself by the end of the week." That stopped me. "You were going to call me?" "Come in," she said. "Please." Her office was neat and orderly, the way offices look when the person working in them actually uses the system they have set up, rather than just intending to. She closed the door behind us, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and sat down with a manila folder already open in front of her. "Your daughter came to me 8 months ago," Sandra said. She spoke directly without preamble, which I appreciated. She wanted to establish a will. She was very clear about what she wanted and very clear about why she did not want her husband involved in the process. My throat tightened. I pressed my back into the chair and kept my face steady. "Go on," I said. "Emily left the house to you," Sandra said. "The property at this address, which has been in your name since 2004 and which she correctly identified as your separate property under California law, was to remain yours without contest. She also designated 30% of her personal savings to fund an educational scholarship in her name to be administered through the Los Angeles Unified School District for elementary school students demonstrating financial need." I pressed my hand flat against my knee beneath the desk to keep it from shaking. "Ryan is not mentioned," Sandra continued. "Not for the property, not for the savings. Emily was explicit about that, and she was fully competent in acting of her own free will when she signed. I have 2 witnesses and a notarized record. This document will hold up." "She never told me," I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. "She never said a word." Sandra's expression shifted slightly, not to pity, to something more careful than that. "She said you would say that," Sandra told me. "She also said to tell you that she did not want you carrying anything else, that you had already carried enough." My chest cracked open a little at that. Just a hairline fracture small enough that I could hold myself together in Sandra Cole's office chair, but I felt it. Emily had sat in this same chair. She had thought about what I would feel when I heard this, and she had prepared for it. She had written instructions for a moment she was afraid she might not be present for. I breathed in through my nose and out slowly. "Ryan knows the will exists." I said because I needed to move forward or I was going to lose the thread entirely. Sandra nodded. "He contacted my office 3 days after Emily passed. He asked to be informed of the contents. I told him that, as a non-beneficiary, he was not entitled to that information and that the document would be read in a formal probate proceeding." She paused. "The hearing is scheduled for Thursday of next week." Thursday, 6 days away. "He does not know what is in it," I said. "No," Sandra confirmed, "but he knows it exists, and based on his tone when he called, I suspect he has concerns about what it might contain." I sat with that for a moment. Concerns. That was a careful word for what Ryan had. What Ryan had was a $400,000 debt to private lenders in Nevada, and a rapidly closing window before a probate court read a document that would eliminate his last remaining option for getting out from under it. He was not going to wait 6 days. He was going to move before Thursday. He had to. "Sandra," I said, "I need you to keep the Thursday appointment regardless of anything that happens between now and then. Do not postpone it for any reason." She studied me over the rims of her glasses. "Is there something I should know about Mr. Hayes?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want that hearing to happen on schedule." She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "Thursday at 10, she said. "I will be there." I stood and we shook hands again. At the door, I stopped my hand on the frame. "She was a good person," I said. It came out before I had decided to say it, pushed up from somewhere I had not meant to open in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning. Sandra Cole's voice when she answered was quieter than it had been for the rest of our conversation. "She was one of the best people who ever sat in that chair," she said. "And she loved you very much, Mr. Hayes. That came through in every single word of that document." I nodded. I could not answer. My jaw was locked too tight and my eyes were burning in a way I was not going to address in a public hallway. So I lifted one hand in a brief acknowledgement and walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stared at the doors until they opened. Inside alone, I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my lungs for days. Emily had known. She had seen what was coming, and she had built a wall around me the only way she could, without alarming anyone. Quietly. Carefully. The way she did everything that mattered. I stepped out into the Pasadena morning and stood on the sidewalk with the November sun on my face. Then I took out my phone and called Marcus. "She had a will," I said when he picked up. "Clean, valid, airtight. Ryan gets nothing, and the reading is Thursday." A beat of silence. Then Marcus said, "He is going to move before Thursday, Walter." "I know," I said. "That is exactly what I'm counting on." I drove home from Sandra Cole's office with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. The November sun was bright and flat over Pasadena, the kind of light that does not warm anything, it just illuminates. I kept my eyes on the road and my breathing steady, and I did not let myself think too hard about what Sandra had said, because if I started pulling on that thread while I was behind the wheel, I was not going to be able to stop, and I needed to get home first. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, sat there for a moment with my hands still on the wheel. Then I got out of the car and walked inside and stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the closed door at the end of the hallway. Emily's room. I had not been in there since the morning after she died, when I had gone in to find the blue cardigan she had wanted to be buried in. That had been a practical errand. I had gone in, found the sweater on the hook behind the door, where she always kept it, and left without looking at anything else. I had not trusted myself to look at anything else. Today was different. I put my hand on the railing and climbed the stairs. The door swung open quietly. The room smelled like her, faintly the way a scent clings to a space after the person is gone, growing thinner every day, until one morning you walk in and it is simply not there anymore. I breathed it in deliberately, the way you drink the last of something you know you will not have again. Her books were stacked on the nightstand the way she always left them, 2 or 3 deep, with a bookmark sticking out of whichever one she had been reading last. A coffee mug she had not gotten around to returning to the kitchen sat beside them. A pair of reading glasses she kept for headaches. Small, ordinary things that had no idea their owner was not coming back. My eyes were burning. I pressed the back of my hand against them hard and breathed through my nose until the feeling passed. I was not here to fall apart. I was here because Emily had been doing something quiet and careful and important, and I needed to understand the full shape of it. I crossed to the bookshelf on the far wall. Emily had organized it the way she organized everything, with a logic that was not immediately obvious, but made complete sense once you understood it. Novels on the top two shelves arranged by the emotion she associated with them, rather than alphabetically. Reference books on the third shelf. And on the bottom shelf, pushed to the very back, behind a row of teaching manuals she had kept from her credential program, a notebook. Not a textbook, a notebook. Spiral bound the cover, a deep blue-green, the color of the ocean on a clear day. I reached in and pulled it out. I knew what it was before I opened it. Emily had kept journals since she was 11 years old. I had given her the first one myself, a plain brown hardcover I had found at a drugstore, because she had been having a hard year, and her school counselor suggested writing things down. She had filled it in 4 months and asked for another one. I carried the notebook to her bed and sat down and opened it to the last entry. Her handwriting was the same as it had always been. Neat, slightly forward-leaning, the letters formed with the particular care of someone who spent her days teaching children how to write. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before she died. I am scared, she had written. Not the dramatic kind of scared that makes you do something about it right away. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your stomach at 3 in the morning and will not let you sleep. I have been looking at the accounts again. The numbers do not make sense no matter how I arrange them. I asked Ryan about the transfers, and he had an answer ready before I even finished the sentence. He always has an answer ready. That is the thing that scares me most. Not the money, the fact that he is always prepared. I have made an appointment with a lawyer. I have not told Dad. He has enough. He has always had enough, and he carries it without complaining, and I am not going to add this to the pile until I know what I am actually dealing with. But just in case something happens that I am not prepared for, I am going to send something to Dad, not call. Ryan checks my phone when he thinks I am not watching. The mail is safer. Dad will know what to do with it. Dad always knows what to do. I love him more than I know how to say. I hope he knows that without me having to say it. I hope he knows. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the notebook down on the bedspread to keep from dropping it. My chest was heaving with something I could not name cleanly. Not crying, not yet. Something that was trying to become crying and could not quite get there because the grief and the love and the guilt were all pressing against each other with nowhere to go. She had been scared. My daughter had been frightened in her own home, and she had not told me because she did not want to add to my weight. She had sat in this room at 3 in the morning with the quiet kind of scared and handled it herself, the way she handled everything with careful steps and good sense, and more love for me than I had ever managed to deserve. I picked the notebook back up. I flipped back through the earlier entries looking for more, and then I stopped. At the very bottom of the final page, added after the main entry in slightly different ink, like she had come back to add it later, were 2 lines. I sent the envelope last Tuesday. I used the post office on Rosemount Avenue, not the one near the house. Dad, if you are reading this, check your desk, the bottom drawer. I put the label in your name so Ryan would not notice it if it came when I was not home. I set the notebook down again. I stood up from Emily's bed and walked down the hall to my office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. There, underneath a layer of old utility bills and a folder of tax documents from 2 years ago, was a padded envelope. The return address was Emily's name, at a post office box in Arcadia I had never seen before. My name was on the front in her handwriting. The postmark read October 17th, 3 weeks before she died. I had received this envelope. I remembered it now, a dim and distant memory from what felt like another life. I had picked it up from the front step on a Saturday morning and put it in the drawer because my phone had been ringing and it was the hospital calling to say Emily's condition had changed and I needed to come in, and I had dropped everything and driven straight there and never thought about the envelope again. I sat down in my desk chair with the envelope in my lap. It was light. Whatever was inside did not weigh much, but my hands would not move to open it. I sat there for a long time, holding something my daughter had sent me while she was still alive, while she was still frightened and still hoping and still planning for a future she was not going to get to live, and I let myself feel the full weight of that before I did anything else. Outside, a car passed on the street. A dog barked twice in a neighbor's yard. The afternoon light moved across the floor of my office the way it always did at this hour, slow and unhurried the way time moves when it has no idea anything has changed. I looked down at my daughter's handwriting on the front of the envelope. Then I reached for the edge of the flap and carefully, slowly began to open it. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope Emily sent me, and I promise you what I found in there changed everything. I thought I knew about how far my daughter had gone to protect me. Drop a number 7 in the comments right now, so I know you are still with me. Because what comes next is the moment this story stops being about a house. It becomes something else entirely. A quick note, the story you are hearing contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaningful storytelling. Some details may not reflect any specific events, and if this type of content is not for you, it is completely fine to step away and find something that fits you better. The envelope was lighter than I expected. I had been holding it for almost 2 minutes before I finally broke the seal, sitting at my desk in the fading afternoon light with the blue journal open beside me and Emily's last written words still visible on the page. My hands, which had been shaking when I first pulled the envelope from the drawer, had steadied themselves by the time I slid my thumb along the flap. That was something I had noticed about myself over 20 years of federal work. The closer I got to the thing I had been looking for, the calmer my hands became, as if my body understood on some level below conscious thought that the moment of finding required steadiness more than any other moment in the process. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a USB drive no larger than my thumbnail, black with a small piece of masking tape pressed along one side. Emily had written on the tape in her careful handwriting. The letters were tiny, fitted into the narrow strip with the same precise economy she used when she labeled the supply bins in her classroom. I had seen those bins once when I came to help her set up at the beginning of the school year. Every crayon, every pair of scissors, every glue stick in its designated place with her neat printing on the label. The tape on the USB drive said, "For Dad, everything I found." I set the drive down and unfolded the paper. It was one page front, only written in the same forward-leaning hand as the journal. She had not wasted space on a greeting. She had simply started. "Dad, if you are reading this, then something happened that I was not able to prevent. I am sorry. I wanted to handle this myself. I did not want you to have to carry this too. But I also know that if I am not there to finish what I started, you are the only person I trust to finish it for me. You will know what to do. You always know what to do. Everything is on the drive, bank records, emails, and one audio file. The audio is from November 3rd. I recorded it on my phone while Ryan was in the other room. He does not know it exists. Dad, please be careful. I love you more than I can say in a letter. Your Emily." I read it twice. Then I set it on the desk with the same care I would use to set down something that could not be replaced, which was exactly what it was. And I sat looking at it for a moment without moving. She had written this, knowing she might not be alive when I read it. She had sat at her kitchen table, or at her desk in the bedroom, or in some other ordinary room of the house she shared with Ryan Carter, and she had written these words as a contingency, as a just in case, as an act of love so practical and so deliberate that it made my chest feel like something was pressing against the inside of it from every direction at once. I picked up the USB drive and carried it to my laptop. The drive contained 3 folders, no labels except numbers, 1, 2, 3. I opened the first folder, 22 scanned documents each one, a bank statement from the joint account Emily shared with Ryan at Bank of America. I had reviewed statements from this account myself in the first days after Ryan came to my door, and I had found the pattern of withdrawals that had made the coffee go cold beside me. But what I was looking at now was different. Emily had printed each statement and gone through it with a red pen before scanning it, circling specific transactions, drawing lines that connected amounts across months, noting in the margins the destination account numbers and the dates and the incremental totals that accumulated into something that could not be explained as ordinary household expense. She had done this without any training in financial forensics. She had done it with a red pen and a kitchen table and the same precise patient attention she brought to grading spelling tests. The attention of someone who understood that the details mattered and that getting them right was not optional. By my count, looking at the circled figures and the margin notes in her handwriting, Ryan had moved $183,000 out of their joint account over an 18-month period. Not in large movements that would have triggered the bank's automatic monitoring systems. In careful increments, amounts that fell just below the thresholds that would generate a suspicious activity report transferred to 3 different receiving accounts that Emily had flagged in red at the top of the first page. I recognized the structure immediately. It was called layering. It was one of the most common techniques in financial fraud, and it was also one of the most clearly illegal because deliberately structuring transactions to stay below bank reporting thresholds was itself a federal crime, separate from whatever underlying fraud the money was designed to conceal. Emily had not known those statutes by name, but she had known that what she was looking at was wrong, and she had documented it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that documentation was the only thing that would make it matter later. I closed the first folder and opened the second. 14 emails. The sender on Ryan's end was an address I did not recognize, a personal account that was not his primary one, which suggested he had created it specifically for this correspondence. The recipient was listed as D. Marchetti. I ran a quick search on the name against public business registries and found nothing immediately, but the initials matched the filing agent listed on one of the Nevada limited liability companies that had received transfers from the joint account, a shell structure registered in Clark County 18 months ago with no publicly listed assets or operations. D. Marchetti was the lender, or the lender's representative. The emails made the relationship clear without ever stating it. Plainly, the way financial correspondence between people doing something they know to be improper tends to communicate an implication rather than declaration. The earliest emails discussed terms, interest rates that were expressed as percentages without specifying the compounding period, which was a technique I had seen many times because it allowed the effective rate to be significantly higher than the stated one. Repayment schedules tied not to fixed dates, but to the completion of transactions that were described only as the Henderson situation and the Summerlin property names I recognized from Ryan's own admission during our conversation in the living room. The later emails were shorter and more urgent. Ryan's messages became less grammatically careful as the timeline progressed the punctuation and sentence structure of a man writing quickly and under pressure. Marchetti's responses became briefer. In one exchange from 8 months before Emily died, Ryan had written that he was working on a solution and that it would not affect their arrangement. Marchetti had responded with a single line. "The asset situation will be resolved. Give me until the end of the year." I read that line twice. The asset situation. Ryan had written those words to describe a plan for resolving his debt. He had written them to a lender who was growing impatient. He had written them 8 months before Emily died, which meant he had been framing my daughter's home, my home, as an asset to be liquidated before she had even become ill. He had been sitting at Sunday dinners and asking about the grandchildren he and Emily did not have, and looking at the crown molding in my living room and thinking behind whatever expression he was wearing at the time about how the asset situation was going to be resolved. I pressed both palms flat against the edge of the desk and breathed through the anger, slowly, deliberately. The way I had learned to breathe through it in rooms where losing control of it would have cost me the case. When it had settled into something colder and more useful, I opened the third folder, one file, an audio recording. The file name was the date November 3rd. Just days before she died, the recording was 41 seconds long. The first several seconds were ambient sound, a door somewhere in the distance, footsteps as immediately as the board outside the upstairs bedroom in the house on Marengo. The one I had always meant to fix when Emily was growing up, and had never gotten around to. The sound of something ordinary and familiar, transformed by context into something that made my jaw tighten. Then Ryan's voice, closer than I expected, as if he had walked directly into the room where Emily was sitting, with her phone recording in her lap or in her pocket, recording in secret because she had understood by then that documentation was the only thing that would make any of this matter. He was not angry. That was the thing that struck me first and the thing I kept returning to afterward. His voice was calm, almost gentle, the voice of someone explaining a thing he considered already decided. "You worry too much," he said. "Your father is not going to be a problem. When the time comes when he is not around anymore, the house transfers cleanly. It has always been the plan. Everything is already in place." Then the sound of the door again, footsteps moving away. The recording continued for 3 more seconds of empty room sound, and then it ended. 41 seconds. When he is not around anymore. Everything is already in place. I closed the laptop. I sat in my desk chair in the late afternoon quiet, and I looked at the wall in front of me, at the small frame photograph I had hung there when I first moved into this house. Emily at 8 years old, sitting on the workbench in my old workshop in the garage, sawdust caught in her hair, and her eyebrows grinning at the camera with the complete and uncomplicated happiness of a child who is exactly where she wants to be. She had been sitting in a room with that man while he said those words. She had been frightened enough to record it, and careful enough not to let him see her doing it, and brave enough to send it to me when she did not know what else to do with it. My throat was tight. My hands were completely still on the desk in front of me. Outside the window, the late afternoon light was doing what it did at this hour in November, going gold and then going fast, the day shortening toward an early dark. I picked up my phone. Marcus answered before the second ring finished. "Marcus," I said. My voice came out lower and steadier than the feeling behind it. "I need you to listen to something. All of it. Do not say anything until it is finished." "I am listening," he said. I opened the laptop, found the audio file, and held the phone close to the speaker. 41 seconds. When it ended, Marcus did not say anything for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, the deliberate exhale of a man reorganizing everything he thought he understood about a situation. "Where are you?" he said. "Home," I said. "Stay there," he said. "I am coming to you." Marcus Webb was already at the corner table when I walked into the coffee shop on Huntington Drive. He had ordered for both of us without being asked 2 black coffees, no food the way we had always worked, when there was something serious on the table, and neither of us wanted the distraction of a menu. He listened to the audio file twice on my phone without saying anything between plays. When it finished the second time, he set the phone down and wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "It is not enough," he said. My jaw tightened. "I know. Walter, I believe you. I believe all of it. But what we have right now is a civil case, not a criminal one. The audio is ambiguous. A defense attorney tears it apart in 20 minutes. The bank records need a forensic accountant to present them properly, and that takes weeks we do not have before Thursday." He leaned forward. "What we need is Ryan committing an actual crime, on camera, with his own words on record. Something a jury understands in 30 seconds without needing an expert to explain it." I looked at my coffee. "He is going to come to the house." "Yes," Marcus said. "He is. Then I want to be ready for him." Marcus studied me across the table for a moment. He had known me long enough to understand that when I said I wanted to be ready, I did not mean I wanted to call a locksmith and sit by the phone. "Tell me what you were thinking," he said. "I have 5 cameras in the house already," I said. "I add 2 more at the kitchen entry and the hallway. I keep my phone recording on the coffee table in plain sight. You stay on an open line from your end, listening in real time. The moment Ryan sets foot inside that house without my permission, you have burglary in progress. First degree because it is an inhabited dwelling. Everything he says inside becomes admissible." Marcus was quiet for a moment, turning his cup slowly on the table. "California one-party consent has an exception for criminal activity in progress," he said. "If he is actively committing a felony inside your home, the recording holds." "That is what I am counting on," I said. "I can have a unit 2 blocks out," Marcus said. 8 minutes response from the moment you give me the signal." He pointed at me across the table. "But Walter, you do not engage physically. You are 65 years old, and I am not explaining to a district attorney why the complainant also has a use of force situation on his hands." "I am not planning to touch him," I said. "I am planning to talk to him." Marcus almost smiled at that. Almost. "God help him," he said quietly. I drove home and spent the rest of the afternoon the way I used to spend the hours before a difficult operation, methodically, without rushing. I mounted the 2 additional cameras myself, one angled at the kitchen door, and one covering the entry to the hallway, running the wires neatly along the baseboards, the way I had run cables in 100 different surveillance setups over 20 years. I checked the sight lines on all 5 cameras. I checked the audio pickup range on my phone recorder app. I unlocked the rear kitchen door and relocked it, testing the resistance of the deadbolt, noting exactly how long it would take a man with basic tools to work through it. 4 minutes, maybe 5. Enough time for me to be in position. I called Denise at 7 that evening. She answered on the first ring. "I need a favor," I said. "Starting tonight and for the next few nights, I need you to watch the street. If you see any unfamiliar vehicle parked within 2 blocks of my house, especially after 10 at night, I need you to call me immediately. Do not call the police. Do not go outside. Just call me." A pause. Then, "Walter, what is going on?" "I am handling something," I said. "I will explain everything when it is over. Can you do this for me?" "Of course I can," she said. Her voice had shifted from curious to steady, the way it used to shift when she was a nurse and someone needed her to be calm. "You be careful." "Always," I said. Before I went to bed, I did one more thing. I went back to Emily's room and carefully removed the last page of her journal. I took it downstairs to my desk and made a clean photocopy on my printer. I folded the copy and put it in the breast pocket of the jacket I planned to wear. The original page I returned to the journal and set the journal on my nightstand. I had spent 20 years preparing for conversations I could not fully predict. I did not know exactly what Ryan was going to say when he walked into my house. But I knew the kind of man he was, and I knew that at some point when the walls closed in, he was going to try to use Emily against me. I wanted to be ready for that too. The first night, nothing happened. I sat in the leather armchair in the dark living room from 11 until 3 in the morning, listening to the street outside settle into the particular quiet that only comes after midnight in a residential neighborhood. Distant traffic. A dog somewhere on the next block, barking twice and then going still. The refrigerator cycling on and off in the kitchen. Nothing else. At 3 I got up, checked every window and door, and went to bed. The second night was the same. I sat in the chair. I listened. The street gave me nothing. By 2 in the morning, my back was aching from the position, and my coffee had gone cold on the side table, and I was starting to wonder whether Ryan had found another angle I had not considered, whether he had a lawyer somewhere quietly filing something that would tie up the probate hearing, whether I had misread his desperation and he was going to let Thursday come and simply try to contest the will afterward. I almost convinced myself of that. Then the third night came. Denise called at 11:14. "Walter?" Her voice was low and careful the way it got when she was being precise. "There is a dark blue sedan parked on the far side of Marengo, just past the corner. I can see it from my upstairs window. 2 men inside. They have been there for 20 minutes, and neither of them has gotten out." My hand tightened on the phone. Every muscle in my body went from resting to ready in the space of a single breath. "Nevada plates?" I asked. A pause. "I cannot see that far, but the car was not there this afternoon." "Go downstairs," I said. "Lock your front door. Do not turn on any lights that were not already on, and do not come outside for any reason. I will call you when it is over." "Walter, please be careful." Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly the way voices crack when someone is trying very hard not to show that they are frightened. "I will," I said. "Thank you, Denise." I hung up and called Marcus. He answered before the first ring finished. "Talk to me." "Dark sedan on Marengo. 2 men. They have been sitting for 20 minutes. I was already moving through the house as I spoke, checking that every interior light was off, that the camera indicator lights I had covered with electrical tape were properly concealed. "I think tonight is the night." "I am activating the line now," Marcus said. His voice shifted into the flat, efficient register I recognized from joint operations, the voice he used when he was no longer a person having a conversation, but a detective running a situation. "Unit is staged 2 blocks north on California Avenue. 8 minutes from your signal. You know what the signal is." "Marcus, the line is full," I said. It was the phrase we had agreed on, something Ryan would not recognize as a signal, even if he heard it. "That is the one," Marcus said, his voice dropping into operational focus. "Walter, be smart." "Always," I said, and ended the call. I set my phone on the coffee table in the center of the living room, screen down, recording app, already running. I had tested the pickup range twice that afternoon. It caught clear audio from every corner of the room. Then I sat back down in Emily's chair, and I waited. The street outside was completely quiet now. No dog, no distant traffic. Just the particular held-breath silence of a neighborhood at 1 in the morning, and underneath it so faint I might have imagined it, the sound of a car engine being switched off somewhere close. I did not imagine it. At 1:47, I heard the first scrape of metal against the deadbolt on the kitchen door. Deliberate. Practiced. Someone who had done this before, or had at least rehearsed it carefully. Then the soft, pressured crack of the safety glass, giving way, muffled by something thick, a folded jacket, or a towel held firm against the pane. Then the door opened. Two beams of light swept into the kitchen and crossed each other on the tile floor. I watched them through the open doorway from my position in the corner of the living room, tracking their movement the way I used to track subjects through surveillance feeds, reading direction and pace and confidence from the way a light moves through a space. One of them was nervous. The beam kept stuttering, catching on cabinet corners and swinging back the movement of a hand that could not quite hold steady. The other one was not nervous at all. "Keep that light down." Ryan's voice barely above a whisper, sharp with the specific irritation of a man who had planned something carefully and was watching it get sloppy. "The study is at the end of the hall. We find the filing cabinet, we get what we came for, and we are out of here in 10 minutes. Nobody has to know we were here." A second voice, lower and rougher. "And if the old man wakes up, it will bow us. And dispares." "He won't," Ryan said. "And if he does, it does not matter. He is 65 years old and he lives alone. What is he going to do?" I almost smiled at that. I settled back into the chair and let them come to me. They moved through my kitchen, the way people move when they think no one is watching. Ryan led. His flashlight beam was steady and deliberate, cutting across the countertops and landing on the doorway to the hallway with the confidence of a man who had studied the floor plan in advance. The second man followed 2 steps behind his light, less certain, sweeping wider than it needed to, catching the edge of the refrigerator and the corner of the breakfast table, and swinging back in the nervous, overcorrecting arc of someone whose body was telling him to leave even as his feet kept moving forward. I had seen that pattern before, many times. In interview rooms, in parking lots, in the lobbies of buildings, where I was waiting for someone who did not yet know I was waiting. The first man in a pair is almost always the one who wants to be there. The second man is almost always the one who was talked into it. I let them reach the center of the living room before I moved. I stood up from the armchair, slowly the way you stand up when your knees are 65 years old and the floor is hardwood and you would prefer not to make a sound. I crossed to the foot of the stairs in 4 steps, keeping to the strip of carpet runner along the wall where I knew the boards did not creak. I reached the switch panel at the base of the staircase and put my hand on it. Ryan's flashlight found the hallway entrance. He took 1 step toward it. I flipped the staircase light on. The effect was immediate. Both men spun toward the light source, their flashlight beams swinging wildly, and for a moment, the living room was a chaos of crossing lights and shadows until they found me standing at the foot of the stairs, with my hands resting steady at my sides, watching them with the same expression I used to wear in federal interview rooms, when I already knew everything and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up. Ryan's flashlight beam landed on my face and stayed there. The color drained out of him so fast it was almost clinical to watch. His mouth opened, nothing came out. "Ryan," I said. My voice was conversational, unhurried. "You are a long way from the front door." The second man took a step backward, and his shoulder blade hit the edge of the bookcase behind him. He was younger than Ryan, early 30s, with the kind of face that had seen trouble before and had not enjoyed the experience. His flashlight hand was shaking hard enough that the beam was jumping across the ceiling in short, choppy arcs. "You said he would be asleep." His voice came out tight and high, the voice of a man whose chest was so constricted with panic that the words could barely squeeze through. He was not talking to me. He was talking to Ryan. "You said he was an old man. You said there was no security system. You did not say anything about cameras." He jabbed his flashlight toward the small lens mounted above the bookcase, the one I had installed 3 days ago. "That is a camera, Ryan. That is a camera pointed right at us." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Tommy, shut up." Tommy did not shut up. His voice climbed another register, his free hand pressing flat against his own sternum, like he was trying to hold something in. "I am not going to prison again. I told you that. I told you that before we left the car, and you said it would be simple, and there is nothing simple about this." I looked at Tommy Reyes for a moment. His whole body was rigid with the specific terror of a man watching a situation he had agreed to turn into a situation he had not agreed to at all. "Tommy," I said quietly. He looked at me. His flashlight beam dropped to the floor. "Sit down," I said. "Right there in that chair. You cooperate with me tonight, and I will make sure the officers who arrive know that you chose to cooperate. That matters. That matters a great deal in terms of what happens to you next." Tommy looked at Ryan. Ryan's face had gone from pale to something uglier, a rigid grinding fury that he was working very hard to keep below the surface. "Do not," Ryan said. The word came out like a door slamming. Tommy looked back at me. Then he crossed to the armchair and sat down. His flashlight hand was still trembling, but his feet were planted and his chin came up slightly. The posture of someone who has just made a decision and is not going back on it. Ryan turned toward me. The pleasant mask he had worn at my front door 9 days ago was completely gone now. What was underneath it was not rage, not yet. It was the expression of a man doing rapid calculations and finding that none of them were coming out in his favor. "Walter," he said. His voice had dropped into something low and controlled. "You do not understand what you are getting involved in." I walked over to the coffee table. I pulled my phone from my pocket, set it down with the screen facing up, and pressed the record button. The red indicator light came on. "Sit down, Ryan," I said. "I understand a great deal more than you think, and we have some things to talk about." Ryan did not sit down. He stood in the center of my living room, with his flashlight still in his hand, his jaw working like he was chewing on something he could not quite swallow. His eyes moved from me, to the phone on the coffee table, to Tommy, sitting in the armchair, and back to me again, running the calculation over and over, and not liking the result any better each time through. "You have no idea what you are doing," he said. "I have a very good idea," I said. "Sit down, Ryan." He did not sit, but he did not move toward me either, which told me the calculation had landed somewhere between defiance and paralysis. I had seen that state before. It was actually the most useful state for an interview. A man who is still deciding what to do will talk. A man who has decided stays quiet. I pulled the chair from beside the bookcase and sat down across from him, putting myself at his eye level, removing the physical advantage of my standing position. It was a technique I had used 1,000 times. You give something small to get something large. "Tell me about the loans," I said. Ryan's eyes snapped to mine. "I am not telling you anything." "The ones in Nevada," I said as if he had not spoken. "The private lenders, D. Marchetti, the $400,000. I kept my voice the same way I kept it in every difficult interview I had ever conducted, level, and unhurried, the voice of someone who already has the answer, and is simply giving you the opportunity to tell your version before the other version becomes the only one on record. I am going to find out regardless. The question is whether you are part of the conversation or not." Something shifted in Ryan's face, a tightening around the eyes. He had not expected me to know that name. "How do you know about Marchetti?" he said. His voice had dropped half a register. "Emily was thorough," I said. The words hit him like something physical. His chin pulled back and his chest rose with a sharp intake of breath. And for just a moment, one unguarded moment, I saw something move across his face that might have been genuine feeling. It was gone, almost instantly replaced by the grinding, recalculating expression that was his default. But I had seen it. I filed it away. "The money," I said again. "Walk me through it." And then, because Ryan Carter had spent 5 years being the smartest person in every room he walked into, because he had spent 9 days believing he was running circles around a grieving old man who made furniture for a living, because the gap between who he thought I was and who I actually was had not yet fully closed in his mind, he started talking. Not calmly, not strategically. He talked the way people talk when they have been holding something too long and the weight of it finally becomes greater than the instinct to stay quiet. His voice came out fast and jagged, his hands moving in sharp cutting gestures, his flashlight still gripped in one fist and swinging with each point he made. The loans had started 3 years ago. Small at first, bridge financing for a real estate deal in Henderson that was supposed to close in 90 days, and did not close for 14 months, by which point the interest had compounded into something that required another loan to service. Then another deal, Summerlin this time, a commercial property that lost 40% of its value before he could offload it. Then Marchetti, who offered terms that seemed manageable until they were not. And by the time Ryan understood the full structure of what he had agreed to, he was $400,000 deep with a personal guarantee he could not walk away from. "The accounts," I said when he paused for breath. "Emily's accounts." His jaw tightened. "I needed operating capital." "You forged her signature," I said, not an accusation. A statement of fact delivered the same way. I would state that the sky was a particular color. Ryan's hand tightened on the flashlight until his knuckles went pale. "I had access to those accounts." Joint access, I said, for household expenses, not for transferring funds to Nevada LLCs in increments designed to avoid bank monitoring thresholds. That is wire fraud, Ryan. That is a federal charge, not a state one. And the signature on the authorization documents for those transfers is not Emily's. A handwriting examiner will confirm that in an afternoon. The word federal landed on him visibly. His shoulders dropped a fraction, his flashlight hand lowered to his side. "Or the house," I said. "Tell me about the house." "I needed to liquidate something," he said. His voice had gone flat, the fight draining out of it the way air goes out of something punctured. "The lenders were going to go to the authorities if I did not pay by the end of the month. The house was the only asset large enough to cover it." "And the documents you brought to my door," I said. "The transfer of title, notarized 3 weeks before Emily died." Ryan did not answer that one. He did not need to. The recording was still running on the coffee table between us, its small red indicator light, steady and patient. And everything Ryan had just said was sitting on it in clean, unambiguous audio that no defense attorney in Los Angeles County was going to be able to explain away in front of a jury. Tommy had not moved from the armchair. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his face pointed at the floor, his flashlight off his hands clasped between his knees. He looked like a man in a waiting room who had just received news he had been half expecting and was now simply processing it. Ryan looked at the phone on the coffee table. He looked at me. And then his face did something I had not seen it do in 5 years of watching him at family dinners and holiday gatherings and Sunday afternoons in this very house. It cracked. Not all the way. Not into tears or collapse. Just a single visible fracture in the careful surface. He maintained a tightening around his eyes and a pulling down at the corners of his mouth that lasted only a second before he got it back under control. But I had seen it, and I knew what was coming next. What came next was the thing I had been prepared for. Ryan took 2 steps toward me, not rushing. Deliberate the way a man moves when he has decided that the conversation is over, and something else is beginning. Tommy came up out of the armchair instantly, not fast enough to be threatening, but fast enough to put himself between Ryan and the coffee table, where my phone was still recording. "Don't," Tommy said. His voice had steadied since he sat down, the panic replaced by something flatter and more resolved. "Ryan, don't. It is done. You heard what he knows. It is done." Ryan stopped. His chest was heaving with shallow, rapid breaths, his hands opening and closing at his sides, and the look on his face was the look of a man who has watched every exit close one by one and is now standing in a room with no doors left. Then he looked at me, and his eyes hardened into something I had not seen before. Not the flat calculation of the man who had come to my door with a leather folder. Not the grinding fury of the man who had watched his plan collapse piece by piece over the last 20 minutes. This was something rawer than either of those. Something that had been waiting underneath all of it. "You want to talk about Emily?" His voice cracked on her name, split right down the middle, and I could not tell whether it was grief or rage that was doing the splitting. "Fine, let us talk about Emily. Emily knew Walter. She knew what I was doing, and she stayed. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call you. She stayed because she loved me, and whatever you think you know about her, whatever little story you have built in your head about who she was and who I was to her, you were not there. You do not know what was between us." His voice was climbing now, the words coming faster, his whole body rigid with the force of what he was pushing out. "She felt sorry for you," he said. The words hit the air like something thrown. "Did you know that she talked about it? How hard it was to watch you alone in that workshop every day making your little furniture projects pretending you were fine. She spent half her energy worrying about you. She protected you from things you did not even know were happening because she did not think you could handle them. She chose me over telling you the truth because she did not trust you to stay standing if she did." My hands were resting on my knees. I did not move them. I looked at Ryan Carter for a long moment. I looked at the rapid rise and fall of his chest, at the shine of sweat on his forehead, at the way his voice had gone high and ragged at the edges, the way voices go when a person is not actually saying what they feel, but is instead saying the version of it designed to cause the most possible damage. I had sat across from a great many people who were trying to hurt me with words. In 20 years of interviewing people at their worst, I had learned that the ones who reach for this particular weapon are almost always reaching because everything else has been taken away. I reached into the breast pocket of my jacket. I took out the folded photocopy of the last page of Emily's journal. I unfolded it, slowly, smoothed it against my knee, and began to read aloud. My voice did not shake. I did not let it shake. I read every word Emily had written in that careful, forward-leaning handwriting of hers. The words she had set down at 3 a.m, when she was frightened and could not sleep, the words she had written about a father she did not want to burden, about a man she trusted above everyone else in her life, about a letter she was going to send because she could not call and because she needed him to be safe, even if she was not there to make sure of it herself. I am scared, I read. Not the dramatic kind of scared, the quiet kind. I read about the accounts and the transfers and the lawyer she had found without telling anyone. I read the part where she wrote that she did not want to add to my weight because I had always carried enough without complaining. And then I read the last 2 lines. Dad, if you are reading this, check your desk. I put the label in your name so Ryan would not notice it. I love him more than I know how to say. I hope he knows that, without me having to say it. I hope he knows. The living room was very quiet when I finished. Tommy had his head down, his clasped hands pressed against his mouth, his shoulders pulled inward. His breath was coming in slow, controlled intervals. The breath of someone fighting to keep themselves together in a room where they did not feel they had the right to fall apart. Ryan was not fighting anything. He was standing in the center of my living room, with his flashlight hanging loose in one hand, and his face doing something I had never seen it do. The rigid calculation was gone. The fury was gone. What was left underneath all of it was smaller than I had expected, and younger, and in any other circumstance I might have felt something more complicated about looking at it. His chin was trembling. His eyes were wet. His free hand came up and pressed hard against his own mouth, knuckles white against his lips, like he was physically holding something in. She protected you, I said quietly. Not because she thought you were weak, not because she felt sorry for you. She protected you because that is who she was. She protected everyone she loved in the quietest ways she could find, and she did it without asking for anything in return. I folded the photocopy carefully and put it back in my pocket. You did not know her, Ryan. You lived with her for 5 years, and you did not know her at all. Ryan's hand dropped from his mouth. A sound came out of him that was not quite a word and not quite anything else. His whole body seemed to compress, inward shoulders, caving knees, bending slightly like something structural had given way somewhere deep inside the framework of him. Tommy lifted his head and looked away toward the window. I picked up my phone from the coffee table. Marcus, I said, the line is full. The line had been open for 40 minutes. Marcus Webb's voice came back through the speaker without hesitation, steady and clear. Got it, Walter, he said. Units are moving. The red and blue lights came through the front window at 2:23 in the morning. They swept across the ceiling of my living room in slow rotating arcs, painting everything in alternating color, and for a moment, the 3 of us stood in that shifting light without moving. Ryan staring at the window, Tommy with his head still bowed, me with my phone in my hand and the recording still running. Then headlights. A second vehicle pulling in behind the first. I crossed to the front door and opened it before anyone knocked. Marcus Webb was on my porch with 2 uniformed LAPD officers behind him, 1 male and 1 female, both of them reading the situation through the open doorway with the practiced rapid assessment of people trained to walk into rooms where things have already happened. Walter. Marcus looked past me into the living room, took in Ryan standing near the bookcase and Tommy in the armchair, and his expression settled into the particular, professional calm of a man who had seen worse and was prepared to handle this. You all right? Uninjured, I said. Come in. The 2 officers moved into the living room with the quiet efficiency of people who did not need to be told where to stand. The female officer positioned herself near Ryan. The male officer crossed toward Tommy, who looked up at him and immediately put both hands visible on his knees without being asked. That single gesture told me everything I needed to know about how many times Tommy Reyes had been in this situation before. Ryan straightened when the officers entered. His chin came up, and the collapsed, compressed look he had worn since I finished reading Emily's journal began to reassemble itself into something more deliberate. I watched him make the decision, in real time, watched him decide that the version of events he was about to present was going to be the aggressive one. Officer? Ryan's voice came out sharp and projected the voice of a man accustomed to being taken seriously in professional settings. I am Emily's husband. This is family property. I came to retrieve my late wife's personal documents. I have every right to be here. The female officer looked at the kitchen doorway. At the deadbolt on the back door, which was still hanging at the angle it had been left, when Ryan's tools had worked through it, at the small, neat hole in the safety glass of the kitchen window where the pane had been pushed in and the fragments swept to one side. She looked back at Ryan. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the particular patience of someone who has heard a great many explanations and is waiting for one that makes sense. "Can you walk me through how you entered the property this evening?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "I have a key. I used the back entry. By forcing a deadbolt and breaking the window glass," the officer said. It was not a question. She gestured toward the kitchen doorway. "At 2 in the morning. Ryan said nothing. His jaw locked, and his eyes went to the floor, and the silence that followed was its own answer. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here with me." I turned to Marcus. "The recording is on my phone. 40 minutes of audio, including his entry, his statements about the financial accounts, the forgery, and the Nevada transfers. The cameras caught the entry through the kitchen door. And there is a USB drive with documentary evidence that corroborates everything he said on tape." Marcus took my phone with both hands the way you take something that matters. "I will need your formal statement tonight." "Whenever you are ready," I said. What followed was methodical and quiet, the way these things are when they go the way they are supposed to go. Ryan was read his Miranda rights in a voice that was clear and unhurried, each right stated completely before the officer moved to the next. His wrists were brought behind his back, and the handcuffs were applied with a click that was much smaller than I had expected, given how long I had been working toward this moment. He did not say anything when the cuffs went on. He looked at the floor. Tommy stood when the male officer approached him, turned around without being asked, and put his wrists together behind his back before the officer had spoken a word. He cooperated through the entire process with the resigned, practiced efficiency of someone who had been through it before, and understood that how you behave in this moment affects everything that comes after it. Marcus pulled me aside while the officers handled the paperwork. "The audio is clean," he said quietly. "Wire fraud, forgery, the entry, all of it. The DA is going to have everything they need." He paused. "Walter, the FBI field office is going to want to talk to you about the Nevada transactions. The interstate wire fraud puts this in their jurisdiction for the federal charges. I will make the referral tomorrow." "I know," I said. "I will cooperate with whatever they need." Marcus nodded. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized the look of someone who has worked alongside you through something difficult and is acknowledging it without making a production of it. "She would be proud of you," he said quietly. "Emily." My throat tightened. I pressed my back teeth together and held the feeling where it was. "I know," I said. "They brought Ryan out through the front door first. He passed within 3 feet of me on the way out, and he did not look at me. He kept his eyes forward and his jaw set, the last remnant of the composed, calculated man he had been when he walked into my home 4 days after my daughter's funeral with a leather folder under his arm. Tommy came out second. He stopped just inside the doorway, and the male officer paused to let him. He turned and looked at me. His face was tired and younger than it had seemed in the dark, the face of someone who had made a series of bad decisions over a long period of time and was standing at the point where they had all converged. "Mr. Hayes," he said. His voice was quiet and direct. "I am sorry about Emily. Not sorry about the break-in. Not sorry about Ryan or the money or any of the rest of it. Sorry about Emily." My chest pulled tight in a way I had not felt all evening, through all of it. Through the recordings and the confrontation and the reading of her journal in the dark. This small, plain sentence from a man I did not know who had come into my house to help take something from me, cracked something open that everything else had not. "Thank you," I said. The words came out rough and lower than I intended. Tommy nodded once. Then he walked out with the officer, and the door closed behind them, and I was standing alone in my living room for the first time since 1:47 in the morning. Outside, the red and blue lights were still rotating. I walked to Emily's armchair and sat down in it, and I put my hands on the arms of it the way I had been sitting for 3 nights of waiting. And I looked at the coffee table where my phone was still sitting, its screen dark. Now the recording finally ended. Denise's porch light came on across the street. A moment later, her front door opened and she stood in the rectangle of warm yellow light it made looking across at my house, and I raised one hand where she could see it through the window. She raised hers back. I sat in the chair and let the quiet come back into the room, and for the first time since Emily died, the quiet did not feel like something missing. It felt like something that had been returned. The days after that night moved differently than the days before it. Before, time had felt like something pressing down, Every morning, I woke up with the weight of what Ryan was doing sitting on my chest before I even opened my eyes, and the hours moved slowly and with purpose, each one requiring something from me. Now the weight was gone, and the absence of it was disorienting in the way that the absence of a chronic pain is sometimes disorienting. You have organized your whole body around compensating for something, and then it is simply not there anymore, and you have to remember how to stand up straight without bracing against it. I gave my formal statement to Marcus the morning after the arrest. We sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours with a recorder between us, and I walked him through everything from the beginning. The account statements, Gerald Marsh and the notary dates, Sandra Cole and the will, the USB drive and the audio file, the 3 nights of waiting and the 40 minutes of recorded conversation that ended with Ryan Carter telling me in his own words exactly what he had done and why. Marcus took notes in a small spiral notebook with a mechanical pencil. When I finished, he closed the notebook and sat back in his chair. The DA reviewed the audio last night. He said, "They are moving forward on all counts: burglary in the first degree, forgery, grand theft, elder financial abuse." He paused. "The FBI field office called me this morning. The wire fraud referral I made yesterday, the interstate transfers to the Nevada accounts. They are opening a parallel federal investigation. They will be in touch with you directly." "I expected that," I said. "Tommy Reyes entered a cooperation agreement this morning," Marcus continued. "He is pleading to misdemeanor trespass. Probation, no jail time in exchange for his full testimony. His statement corroborates everything on the recording." He looked at me across the table. "Walter, between the audio, the cameras, the USB documentation Emily put together, and Tommy's testimony, Ryan Carter does not have a path through this. His attorney is already talking about a plea." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. Outside the kitchen window, the November sun was doing what it always did this time of year, giving light without warmth, illuminating everything clearly, and leaving the cold exactly where it was. "Good," I said. 3 days later, Sandra Cole called. "The probate hearing went forward this morning," she said. Her voice carried the particular satisfaction of someone whose careful work has just been validated by a court of law. "The will has been admitted to probate. The court found it valid in all respects. The property transfer is complete, Walter. The house is yours formally and finally with no remaining legal challenges." My hand tightened on the phone. "And the scholarship fund?" "The Emily Hayes Educational Scholarship has been established with the Los Angeles Unified School District," Sandra said. "The first disbursements will go out in the spring semester. Elementary school students demonstrating financial need exactly as Emily specified." A brief pause. She was very precise about what she wanted, right down to the age group, 3rd grade through 5th. 3rd grade through 5th. The grades she had spent her career teaching. My throat did something complicated. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment and breathed through it. "Thank you, Sandra," I said when I could, "for everything you did for her." "She did most of it herself," Sandra said quietly. "I just wrote down what she told me." The week that followed was administrative in the way that the aftermath of serious things often is. Phone calls with the FBI field office, 2 agents who were professional and thorough, and who treated the USB documentation Emily had assembled with the same respect a forensic accountant would give a formal audit. A follow-up interview with the DA's office. Paperwork from Sandra's office formalizing the property transfer. A conversation with the Los Angeles Unified School District's foundation office about the mechanics of the scholarship disbursement. In between all of it, Marcus called on a Thursday afternoon. "Ryan took the plea," he said. 4 counts. Burglary 1, forgery, grand theft, elder financial abuse. Sentencing is in 6 weeks. The federal wire fraud charges are separate and still pending, but the state case is resolved." He let that sit for a moment. "He is going to do time, Walter. Real time." I was standing in my workshop when he called my hand, resting on the surface of the small table I had been building before all of this started. The one I had been planning to give Emily. The wood was smooth under my palm, sanded to the grain, the way I had taught myself to do it over 15 years of practice. "How much?" I asked. "The DA is recommending 4 years for the state charges," Marcus said. "With the federal case on top of that, his attorney is estimating he serves 6 to 8 total before any possibility of parole." 6 to 8 years. I did not feel the satisfaction I might have expected. What I felt was quieter than that and harder to name. Not relief exactly, Not closure, because that word had always seemed to me like something people said when they needed to believe that pain has an ending rather than just a changing shape. What I felt was something closer to the feeling you get when you have been holding a door shut against something for a very long time and you are finally able to let go of the handle. Not because the thing behind the door is gone, but because someone else has it now and it is no longer yours to hold. "Marcus," I said, "thank you for all of it." "You did the work," he said. I just answered the phone. After I hung up, I stood in the workshop for a while with my hand on the table. The wood was quiet under my palm. The afternoon light came through the high window above my workbench, the way it always did at this hour, cutting across the sawdust on the floor in a long diagonal stripe. I thought about Emily sitting on this workbench when she was 8 years old, sawdust in her hair, asking me what I was making. I thought about the scholarship bearing her name and the third graders who would benefit from it next spring, children in classrooms just like the ones she had given her career. To children who would never know her name, but whose lives would be a little different because she had existed. I thought about the USB drive she had put together at her kitchen table with a red pen and a determination that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with love. She had done all of that alone and frightened and without telling anyone. My eyes were burning. I let them burn. I pressed both palms flat on the surface of the table and leaned my weight into it and let the feeling move through me, the way feelings need to move when you have been holding them at arm's length for too long. Then I straightened up, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and went inside to make dinner. Denise came over the morning after I gave my statement to Marcus. I had not called her. I had not told her to come. But at 8:15 there was a knock at my front door, and when I opened it, she was standing on my porch with 2 mugs of coffee, one in each hand, steam rising from both of them in the cold November air. She had walked across the street in her coat and her garden shoes, the old rubber ones she wore when she did not want to bother with laces, and she looked at me the way she had looked at me the night Emily died, not with pity, with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided that what you need right now is not words but presence. "I thought you might want company," she said. I stepped back from the door. "Come in." She handed me one of the mugs as she passed. Her hands were warm from holding it, and mine were cold, and I wrapped both palms around the ceramic and felt the heat move into my fingers. We went to the workshop. I did not plan to take her there. It was simply where my feet went when I was not directing them anywhere specific, the way you find yourself in a particular room of your house without remembering the decision to go there. I slid the side door open and we went in, and I pulled the 2 old stools out from under the workbench and we sat down on them the way we used to sit when Emily was young and would come over with Denise's daughter on summer afternoons, and the 4 of us would sit in the workshop and drink lemonade and talk about nothing in particular. The morning light came through the high window and laid itself across the sawdust on the floor. Outside, a mockingbird was working through its repertoire in the oak tree at the back of the yard, cycling through half a dozen other bird songs, one after another, in that restless, tireless way mockingbirds have. Denise wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the small table on the workbench, the one I had been building for Emily. "Tell me," she said. So I told her. Not everything. Not the operational details or the legal specifics or the names of the accounts and the Nevada LLCs, but the shape of it. The 20 years at the Bureau that I had never mentioned to anyone in this neighborhood. The reason I had kept it hidden. The account statements I had noticed 6 months before Emily got sick and said nothing about, and the weight of that silence that I had been carrying ever since. Denise listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without offering her reaction before I had finished, without filling the pauses with reassurance. She had been a nurse for 30 years, and that profession teaches you, if you let it, that the most useful thing you can do for someone who is talking is simply to stay in the room and keep your face open. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, not the strained quiet of someone searching for the right thing to say, the settled quiet of someone who has already found it and is simply deciding when to offer it. "You know what I think," she said finally. "Tell me." I think Emily knew exactly who her father was. Denise turned her mug slowly in her hands, looking at it rather than at me. Not the FBI agent, not the man who spent 20 years catching people who thought they could get away with things. Just her father. The man who built her a bookshelf when she was 9, because she had more books than her bedroom could hold. The man who drove 4 hours in the rain to come to her college graduation because his car broke down halfway and he rented another one rather than miss it. She looked up at me then. She knew Walter, And she sent that envelope to you, and not to a lawyer, not to the police, not to anyone else, because she knew that, when it mattered, you would know what to do. She was not protecting you because she thought you were weak. She was trusting you because she knew you were the right person for this. The mockingbird outside cycled through a cardinal's song, and then a sparrow's, and then something I could not identify. My chest had been tight since she started talking tighter, with each sentence the way a knot pulled taut does not loosen, but simply becomes more defined, more present, more impossible to ignore. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and breathed in through my nose, and the breath came out uneven, catching at the top, and my eyes went hot and blurred, and I stopped trying to prevent what was happening. I cried, not quietly, not with the controlled, contained grief of someone managing their emotions in public. My shoulders shook with it, and my face crumpled, and the sounds that came out of me were the sounds of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time, and had finally found the release point. I pressed one hand over my eyes, and the other gripped the edge of the workbench, and I let it come, all of it, the grief for Emily, and the guilt about the 6 months I had stayed quiet, and the exhaustion of the 9 days of investigation, and the 3 nights in the chair, and the 40 minutes of recording, and everything that had come after. Denise did not put her arm around me. She did not say anything. She simply stayed on her stool with her coffee in her hands, and her feet flat on the floor, a solid and uncomplicated presence in the room, the way a good nurse stays with a patient through something painful, without trying to shorten it, or redirect it, or make it mean something before it is ready to mean something. She let me finish. When I had, I kept my face covered for another moment, pressing the back of my hand against my eyes, until the burning settled. Then I straightened on the stool and took a long breath and looked at the small table on the workbench. I was going to give that to her, I said. My voice came out rough and scraped but steady. For her classroom, she wanted a small table for the reading corner, something the kids could gather around. Denise looked at the table. "It is beautiful, Walter." "It is not finished," I said. "Then finish it," she said simply. I picked up my coffee mug. It had gone lukewarm while I was not drinking it. I drank it anyway, both hands around it the way Denise had taught me without meaning to on the night Emily died. Outside, the mockingbird had moved on to something new. "I have been thinking about leaving," I said. "Not permanently, just somewhere with different walls, somewhere the light comes in from a different direction in the morning." Denise nodded slowly. "That sounds right," she said. "I have not decided anything yet." "You do not have to decide anything yet," she said. "You just have to finish the table." I looked at the table. The wood was smooth and pale, waiting for its final sanding, waiting for the coat of finish that would seal the grain and give it the quiet luster that good wood has when it has been treated properly. Emily would have run her hand across it, the way she always ran her hand across things I made, with a kind of wondering attention, like she could not quite believe that something so ordered and clean had come out of raw material and time and 2 ordinary hands. I set my mug down on the workbench. I picked up a piece of sandpaper, and I started working. I finished the table on a Tuesday. It took me 4 more days after Denise left working in the mornings, when the light was right and the workshop was cold enough to keep me alert. I sanded it through 3 progressively finer grits the way I always did with pieces I cared about, and applied 2 coats of a water-based finish that brought out the warmth in the oak without darkening it. When it was done, I set it in the middle of the workshop floor and looked at it for a long time. It was a good table, small and solid and honest, the kind of thing that would last decades if it was treated with ordinary care. Emily would have liked it. That afternoon, I brought the blue journal out to the workshop, set it on the workbench, poured myself a coffee, and opened it to the first page. She had dated it. November 14th, the year she turned 11. Her handwriting was different then, rounder and less certain, the letters formed with the exaggerated care of a child who has recently been taught that penmanship matters. "Dear Journal," she had written. "My dad gave me this today. He said writing things down helps when things feel big. Things feel pretty big right now, because Mom has been gone for 2 years, and sometimes the house is very quiet. But Dad makes breakfast every morning even when he is tired, and he always asks me how I slept. I think that is his way of saying he loves me without saying it." I set my coffee down. I think that is his way of saying he loves me without saying it. I read for 2 hours without stopping. The journal moved through her life in the way that journals do when someone writes in them faithfully, not every day but often enough that the gaps are crossable, the distance between entries never so large that you lose the thread. I read about her middle school years, the friendships that formed and frayed and reformed in the complicated ways they do at that age. I read about the year she decided she wanted to be a teacher, not because anyone suggested it, but because she had a third-grade teacher named Mrs. Calloway who made her feel like the things inside her head were worth saying out loud, and she had never forgotten what that felt like. I read about college, about the apartment she shared with two other women in Westwood, about the student teaching placement that nearly broke her and then didn't about the morning. She found out she had been offered her first real classroom and called me before she called anyone else so early that I had not yet had my coffee, and I remember standing in this same kitchen in my bathrobe with the phone pressed to my ear and my eyes wet before she had finished the sentence. I read about Ryan. The early entries were warm about him, cautiously warm, the way Emily was warm about most things, not effusive, but genuine, noting specific things he had done or said that she found appealing. He remembered things. He asked good questions. He made her feel she wrote like the person she was talking to in a room full of people. I read the entries where that warmth began to qualify itself. Small things at first. A comment he made about money that she had not liked. A disagreement about finances that he had resolved not by listening, but by talking louder until she stopped pushing back. An evening when he had gone through her phone while she was in the shower, and his explanation afterward had been so smooth and immediate that she had accepted it, and then lain awake at 3 a.m, wondering why a smooth explanation had made her feel worse rather than better. I read the last year. By then the entries were shorter and more careful, the handwriting tighter, as if she was writing with less space available to her. She wrote about the accounts, about the lawyer, about a conversation with a colleague at school, a woman named Patricia who had been through something similar, and who had told Emily quietly over lunch in the break room that the most important thing was to document everything. Document everything. She had. I closed the journal when I finished and held it in both hands and looked at the workshop around me, the small table in the center of the floor, the tools on the pegboard above the workbench, the high window with the afternoon light coming through it. Emily had sat in this room hundreds of times. She had asked me questions about every project I had ever built in here, what wood I was using and why, what joint I was cutting, and how I knew it would hold what I was going to do with it when it was finished. She had never been particularly interested in woodworking as a craft. What she was interested in was the fact that I was interested in it, and she paid attention to things that mattered to the people she loved, with the same quality of focus she brought to everything else. I had not understood until I read the journal that I had been doing the same thing in reverse. Every question she had ever asked me about the workshop, every Sunday dinner I had driven across the city for, every school play and parent night I had attended even after she was an adult and the teacher rather than the student. I had thought I was showing up because she needed me to. The journal made it clear that she had been showing up for me just as much. My phone rang at 4 p.m. The number had a Los Angeles area code I did not recognize. I answered it. Mr. Hayes. The voice was professional and unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to making calls that required a certain amount of diplomatic groundwork before the actual ask. My name is Special Agent Reeves, FBI Field Office, Los Angeles. I believe Detective Webb has mentioned our investigation into the financial transactions connected to the Ryan Carter case. He has, I said. We have reviewed the documentation you provided, Agent Reeves said. The assembly of evidence on that USB drive was thorough, impressively so. A pause. Mr. Hayes, I am going to be direct with you. We are aware of your background. Your file with the Bureau is still active in the historical records, and frankly, given the nature of this case and your obvious continued capability, we would like to discuss the possibility of bringing you on as a consulting specialist. Temporary compensated specific to the financial fraud aspects of the Carter investigation and potentially others with similar profiles. I looked at the blue journal on the workbench in front of me. I looked at the table in the center of the floor. I looked at the high window and the afternoon light coming through it, at the angle it always came through at this hour, and I thought about a cabin I had driven past once on a road trip up the coast, a small wooden structure set back from the highway above Malibu with a covered porch facing the water, and a stand of old eucalyptus trees on the north side that would break the wind in the winter. Agent Reeves, I said, I appreciate the call. I want to be genuinely useful to your investigation, and I will cooperate fully as a witness and provide whatever documentary support you need. I paused. But I retired 15 years ago for reasons that have not changed. I am going to respectfully decline the consulting offer. A brief silence. I understand. Agent Reeves said, "and I respect that. We will be in touch about the witness portion." "Whenever you need me," I said, "I will be available." I ended the call and set the phone down on the workbench beside the journal. Outside, the mockingbird was back in the oak tree working through its catalog again. I listened to it for a moment, and then I looked at the small table in the center of the workshop floor, and I made a decision that had actually been forming for longer than I had consciously known. I was going to leave Pasadena, not because there was nothing here, but because what was here was memory, and memory needed space around it to stay memory rather than becoming something heavier. I could take what mattered with me, the journal, the table, the badge in the drawer, which I no longer needed to hide and no longer needed to display. I could leave the rest of it for whoever came next. I picked up my phone and called a real estate agent I had used 15 years ago. When I first bought the house, a woman named Carol, who had sent me a Christmas card every year since without fail. She answered on the second ring. "Walter Hayes," she said, with the warmth of someone genuinely pleased to hear from you. "It has been years. What can I do for you?" "I want to sell the house, Carol," I said. "And I need to find something small near the water." Carol found a buyer in 11 days. She called me on a Wednesday morning with the offer a young couple from Glendale with a 3-year-old daughter and another child on the way. And something about that specific detail settled in my chest in a way I had not expected. The house was going to have children in it again. It was going to have small shoes by the front door and crayon marks on the door frames that someone would try to wash off and not quite manage. It was going to be loud in the mornings, in the particular way that houses with young children are loud, full of the urgent overlapping noise of small people who have not yet learned that the world does not need to hear everything they think of the moment they think it. Emily would have liked that very much. I accepted the offer the same afternoon. The week before closing, I drove to Rosemead Elementary on a Thursday morning. The principal met me in the front office, a tall woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and the look of someone who has spent enough years in schools to have stopped being surprised by most things, but has not yet stopped caring about any of them. Her name was Dr. Okafor, and when I explained why I was there, she sat very still for a moment, her hands flat on her desk, and then she took her glasses down from her hair and put them on and looked at me more carefully. "Emily Hayes Carter," she said. "She taught here for 6 years. 7, I said. "She started the year after she got her credential." Dr. Okafor nodded slowly. "She was exceptional, the kind of teacher that the kids remember 20 years later, the kind that parents request by name every spring during placement." She paused. "We were devastated when she passed." My throat pulled tight. I pressed through it. "The scholarship will cover tuition costs, school supplies, and extracurricular fees for students in financial need 3rd grade through 5th. Emily was specific about the grade range. "Because those were her grades," Dr. Okafor said quietly. "Yes," I said. "Because those were her grades." We shook hands at the door. As I was leaving, Dr. Okafor touched my arm briefly, the light, deliberate touch of someone who wants to convey something they do not quite have words for. "She talked about you," she said. "Emily, she mentioned her father often. She was very proud of you." I nodded. I could not do more than that. I walked to my car and sat in it for a few minutes, with both hands on the wheel before I started the engine. She was proud of me. I had spent the last several weeks wondering whether I had done enough, paid enough attention at the right moments. The answer, it turned out, had been sitting in a blue journal and in the quiet testimony of a principal who had known my daughter for 7 years and was telling me, without knowing everything it meant, that Emily Hayes Carter had gone through her days proud of the man who raised her. I started the engine and drove home. The closing was on a Friday. I signed the paperwork at Carol's office on Lake Avenue, and when it was done, I shook Carol's hand and walked out into the December afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the strange lightness of having transferred something large. That evening, Denise came over. She did not knock this time. She simply appeared at my workshop door, the way she had been appearing at my workshop door for 11 years, and she leaned against the frame with her arms crossed and watched me wrap the small table in moving blankets with the careful attention of someone packing something irreplaceable. "Where is it going?" she asked. "With me," I said. She was quiet for a moment, watching my hands work the blanket around the legs of the table. "Good," she said finally. "It should go with you." I finished wrapping the table and set it against the wall and straightened up and looked at her. Denise Holt, who had appeared at my door the night Emily died, with her practical hands and her steady presence, and her refusal to make grief into something that needed to be managed. Who had walked across the street in her garden shoes with 2 cups of coffee and sat on a workshop stool and listened to me fall apart and had not flinched or redirected or tried to make it smaller. "I do not know how to thank you," I said. She made a short dismissive sound, the kind she made whenever anyone suggested she had done something worth acknowledging. "You would have done the same." "I would have tried," I said. "I am not sure I would have done it as well." She crossed the workshop and hugged me. It was a firm, unsentimental hug, the hug of someone who does not do things halfway, and I held onto it for a moment longer than I might have otherwise, because it was warm and real, and because the workshop was almost empty and the walls were about to stop being mine. "You call me," she said when she stepped back. Her voice had gone slightly rough at the edges. "When you get there, wherever there is." "Malibu," I said. "There is a place above the highway, small. It has a covered porch." Her eyes went bright for a second before she controlled it. "That sounds exactly right," she said. She walked back across the street in the December dark, and I watched her go until her front door closed behind her. The next morning, I called Marcus. He met me at the same coffee shop on Huntington Drive, where we had planned everything 3 weeks earlier. He was already at the corner table when I arrived, 2 black coffees. No food, the same as always. "I am leaving Pasadena," I told him. He nodded like he had already known this was coming. "Where?" "Malibu," I said. "Somewhere I can hear the water." Marcus picked up his coffee. He looked at it for a moment, rather than at me, in the way he did when he was choosing his words carefully. "You did good work, Walter, on this one, all of it." "Emily did the work," I said. "I just finished what she started." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You both did," he said. "She built the case. You had the sense to see it and the patience to let it come together the right way." He set the cup down. "Not everyone would have done it that way. A lot of people would have gone in swinging and blown the whole thing." "I had a good teacher," I said. 20 years of them." He smiled at that. A real smile, the kind Marcus Webb did not produce often or carelessly. He put his hand out across the table, and I shook it. And we held the handshake a beat longer than a casual one, the grip of 2 people who have been through something together and do not need to name it to acknowledge it. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too, Marcus," I said. I drove back to the house on Marengo for the last time that afternoon. The moving truck had already come and gone. The rooms were empty, the floors clean, the walls showing the pale rectangles where pictures had hung for 15 years. My footsteps echoed in a way they never had when the house was full. I walked through every room, not slowly, not with ceremony, just a straightforward passage from one space to the next, the way you confirm something you already know. The kitchen where I had made 10,000 breakfasts, the living room with the leather armchair that was too big for the truck, and that I had sold to Carol's assistant for $75. The staircase with the switch panel at the base where I had stood in the dark and waited. Emily's room, which was just a room now, with morning light coming through the window and a small circular mark on the floor where her bedside table had stood. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I turned around and walked downstairs and out through the front door and pulled it shut behind me and did not look back at the house as I walked to my truck. The small table was wrapped and secured in the truck bed. The blue journal was on the passenger seat. The badge was in a wooden box on the floor behind the driver's seat. A box I had made from the last pieces of oak from my workshop, dovetailed at the corners, fitted with a small brass clasp. I started the engine. The December morning was clear and cold, the San Gabriel Mountains sharp against the pale sky to the north, and as I pulled out of the driveway for the last time, I did not feel the weight I had been carrying since November. What I felt instead was something lighter and less definite, a tentative openness like a window that has been closed for a long time and has just been raised an inch, letting in the first thin thread of new air. Emily had taught me that. Not in words, in the way she had lived. I turned west toward the coast and drove. The cabin was smaller than it had looked from the road. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the graveled driveway on a Thursday afternoon in December, the Pacific visible through the eucalyptus trees in long silver strips between the branches. Smaller and older, with a covered porch that ran the full width of the front, and a garage on the north side that was going to need new weather stripping on the door before the winter rains came in earnest. The wood on the porch railing was weathered to a soft gray, the kind of gray that takes decades to develop and cannot be faked with paint. I sat in the truck for a moment and looked at it. Then I got out, unlocked the front door, and carried the small table inside first. I set it in the corner of the main room by the window that faced the water. It fit there the way things fit when you have not planned it. But the proportions simply work. The table the right height for the window the right height for the view the right size for the room. I stood back and looked at it for a moment. This thing I had built in my workshop in Pasadena, with the intention of giving it to my daughter, sitting now in a cabin above Malibu in the December light, doing what good furniture does when it is in the right place. It looked like it had always been there. I spent the first 2 days unpacking and settling, which was not as much work as it might have been, because I had not brought very much. The tools went into the garage, arranged on the pegboard the way they had always been arranged, each one in its specific place, because that particular order was one I had established 30 years ago and saw no reason to change. A work table went along the south wall of the garage where the light came in best in the mornings. I found a piece of oak in a lumber yard in Santa Monica, a long, clear board with a straight grain and good color, and brought it back and set it on the work table, and looked at it for a while without deciding yet what it was going to become. The cabin smelled like eucalyptus and salt air, and the particular dry mustiness of a place that has been closed up for a few months. I opened every window on the first morning and let the December air move through it, cold and damp and carrying the sound of the surf from below the bluff. By the second evening, the mustiness was gone, and what remained was simply the smell of the place itself, which was good. On the third morning, I woke before the sun came up. I lay in the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room and listened to the ocean, which was louder here than I had expected. A low and continuous sound that had no beginning and no end. The sound of something that had been doing what it was doing long before I arrived and would continue long after I left. I found that I did not mind the unfamiliarity. I found that it was, in fact, precisely what I had come for. I got up and made coffee. I carried it out to the covered porch and sat in the wooden chair I had placed there the day before, a chair I had made myself 8 years ago from a piece of walnut a neighbor in Pasadena had given me when he cut down a tree in his yard. The chair had been in my workshop all that time, used mostly as a place to set things down. Here on this porch facing this water, it became what it had always been meant to be. The sun came up over the hills behind me and lit the ocean in stages, first gray, then silver, then a pale and luminous gold that made the water look like something precious rather than simply large. A pelican moved along the surface about 50 yards out, flying low and deliberate, its wings barely moving, riding some invisible current of air above the water, with the unhurried confidence of a creature that has been doing this exact thing for a very long time. I drank my coffee and watched it go. After a while, I went inside and came back with 2 things. The blue journal and the wooden box I had made in the last days in Pasadena, dovetailed at the corners, fitted with a small brass clasp. I set them both on the small table beside my chair. I opened the box first. The badge was inside, resting on a piece of clean cloth. I had not looked at it closely in 15 years. I looked at it now. The gold had dulled slightly with time, the way gold does when it is not polished, not losing its value, but losing its shine, becoming something quieter than it had been. The seal was still crisp. The number was still legible. I held it in my palm for a moment. 20 years, 200 cases, conferences in rooms with no windows, testimony that had put people in prison for decades, evidence assembled from fragments so small that most people would not have known there was anything there to find. A career built on the premise that the truth, however carefully it had been buried, could always be located if you were patient enough and methodical enough, and willing to follow the thread wherever it led. I had not regretted leaving. I wanted to be honest about that, at least with myself, sitting on this porch in the December light. I had left because I was tired, and because I had spent 20 years away from the life I actually wanted, and because I had wanted to build things with my hands instead of cases with evidence. I had made the right choice. I had not regretted it then, and I did not regret it now. But I had needed it to still be there, in the drawer, available, a reminder of who I had been before I chose who I was going to become. I did not need that anymore. I placed the badge back in the wooden box and closed the brass clasp and set the box on the table. Not hidden, not displayed, simply present the way things can be present when you are no longer organizing your relationship to them around either hiding or showing. I picked up the blue journal. I did not open it. I had read it through completely, and I knew what was in it, and I did not need to read it again to have it with me. I held it in both hands the way you hold something you are glad to have, not because you need to grip it, but because the contact itself is enough. The pelican had gone. The water was fully gold now, shifting as the light continued to change, moving through colors I did not have precise names for. Somewhere below the bluff, a wave broke, and the sound of it came up through the eucalyptus trees. A moment later, delayed the way all sounds are delayed when they have distance to cross. I thought about Ryan Carter, which I had not done in several days. I thought about him without heat, which surprised me slightly. He was serving time in a California state facility, with the federal charges still pending. He had made a series of choices over a long period of time that had compounded into a consequence he could not now avoid, and whatever happened to him from here was the province of courts and time rather than mine. I had finished what I needed to finish. The rest of it was not my weight to carry. I thought about Emily. I thought about her the way I had been learning to think about her since I read the journal all the way through, not with the sharp particular grief of the first weeks, but with something that had more room in it. She had been here. She had been real and specific and full of the particular qualities that made her herself and no one else. She had been proud of me. She had trusted me with the most important thing she had in her possession when she was frightened and did not know what else to do. She had known I would know what to do with it. She had been right. My eyes went warm. I let them. I sat on the porch of my cabin above Malibu with the Pacific laid out in front of me, and the coffee going cool in my hand and the blue journal resting against my chest, where I had pressed it without quite deciding to, and I felt the grief and the love and the gratitude moving through me, the way the December light was moving across the water, constantly changing, never finished, always the same thing underneath. I had spent 20 years learning how to find things that people had hidden. I had spent 15 years learning how to be still. Emily had spent 34 years learning how to love the people in her life with the whole of her attention, without asking them to be different or bigger or easier to love than they were. Of the three of us, she had learned the most important thing. The sun was fully up now, the gold giving way to the bright, ordinary light of a December morning in California, the kind of light that makes everything look clear and slightly improbable, too vivid to be real, and yet completely real. The ocean moved the way it always moved, without asking anything of anyone, without pausing for grief or gratitude or the specific weight of what any particular person, standing on any particular shore, happened to be carrying. I set the journal on the table beside the wooden box. I picked up my coffee with both hands, and I sat in the chair I had made from a neighbor's walnut tree and looked at the Pacific Ocean and breathed the salt air and felt for the first time in a long time the particular quality of a morning that is simply itself. Not the morning after something, not the morning before something else. Just a morning. Just this. A small smile found its way onto my face before I was aware of looking for it. I let it stay. I have thought about what this family story taught me, and I keep coming back to one thing. Silence is not the same as weakness, and strength is not the same as noise. I stayed quiet for 15 years because I wanted peace. But real peace, I learned, is not the absence of conflict. It is knowing who you are when conflict finally arrives at your door. If I could offer anyone one piece of advice from this family story, it would be this: do not wait the way I waited. Do not let the people you love carry dangers alone because you are afraid of disturbing the quiet. Emily carried something heavy in silence to protect me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for her courage and wishing I had acted sooner. This was a family betrayal that could have broken me. It did not, because Emily made sure it would not. I believe God places the right people in our lives at exactly the right moments, and Emily was always the right person in mine. If this family betrayal reached something in you, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that quiet strength and patient truth still matter in this world, I would be honored to have you subscribe and walk with me through the stories still to come. To everyone who stayed until the very end, thank you. It means more than you know. Please note, the stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for the purpose of reflection and meaningful storytelling. If this type of content is not for you, we completely respect that, and we encourage you to find the stories that speak best to your heart.